it's ready, you just have to click go live when I'm sitting down.
Right,
And,
deep breath, calm down.
Turn the amp off.
Turn the amp off and put my phone on silent.
Light off screen.
Is your phone on silent?
Oh my gosh, I think I just...
You can't hear the vibration when it's on silent, so.
I'll be able to. Alright, dude. And then bring it up on OBS, yeah, so I can see myself.
Yes, sir. Titles?
Oh. Yeah, why not? having lined all that up. Amazing. Amazing. Yeah? We happy?
Still spinning.
Okay. Yeah? Good evening, everyone. We've made it. That was interesting. So there was just no way I could interact with the event on the Clapham Chamber Concerts page, and so there was no way I could set up this stream. So thank you very much for popping over here, and here we are. What a bizarre experience, but I guess lockdown has generated many bizarre experiences. We've been doing little bits and bobs of broadcasting concerts from here for the last few months, and it's lovely to engage with JP and Amanda again, albeit only on a Facebook page. But let's all just hope that lockdown continues to ease and that no second waves or spikes prohibit us from reuniting for some proper chamber music again soon. I'm going to play two pieces for you this evening. One's very well known, the first one. The second one, I'd be surprised if as many people know it, but I think it should be better known. It's absolutely stonking. We're going to start with a little bit of Schubert. This is his third impromptu in G flat, opus 90, number 3. Schubert's last few years of his life were the years, really. His overwhelming realization that he was not long of this world due to his syphilis that he contracted 6 years before his death prompted him to flood the world with his music. Music that was becoming even more extraordinary as he got closer to endgame. What's remarkable really when we think about it is that he wasn't well thought of at this time. Some of his good friends admired him for his song compositions, but that's about it. And not much else was getting a lot of airing, and it's not until relatively recently, or certainly well after his death, that he started to get the recognition he deserves. I mentioned the song. Schubert was possibly the most natural song composer there's ever been. These effortlessly beautiful melodies just seemed to pour out of him, and even when writing for piano, he had an amazing vocal song-like quality to his compositions, and this piece is a very good example of that. We often think of him being Mr. Impromptu. We can't really imagine that anyone else could have invented the impromptus, but actually it was a Bohemian pianist, Jan Gorisek, who had written the first impromptu that we're aware of 5 years previously to this piece. Schubert wasn't big into titles and may have viewed them as being a little bit gimmicky, but his publishers certainly thought that they sold. Titled works sold and were much less dry and they led the audiences to have much more of an imagination about what they might contain. So he wrote 2 sets of impromptus, 2 sets of 4. These are composed at the end of 1827 and were published just before his death. His second set of 4 were not published until after his death. They're simple pieces on the surface of it, impromptu coming from the idea of being improvised, being free. Again, this is where I think the name came more from the publisher than from him. They're actually quite taut in structure, possibly apart from the first one. But this one is in pretty simple ternary form, so that's when we have 2 identical outer sections and a contrasting middle section. Although what he does do here is stick on a little coda at the end, a little kind of tail section to re-emphasize the closing of the piece. As a work, I think it has two main types of music reflected in its structure. So the opening and the final section are very calm, reflective. The melody is at the top of the right hand. The left hand provides very simple accompaniment. And the type of accompaniment in the right hand, I think, is very telling. At the beginning, it's all arpeggios, which means that none of the notes in the right hand accompaniment are challenging the overriding harmony at the time. Comme ça. Everything fits within the overriding harmony, and all really seems quite well with the world. The middle section is where the left hand starts to throw spanners into the works, and it does it in diametrically opposed ways to those arpeggios. So we have arpeggios on the piano, and we have scales, and scales are consecutive notes that encompass many different harmonies. And the left hand is the one that brings stormy darkness to the party. These rumbling scales in the bottom, and it then falls to the right hand to act as the plicator. It's almost as if the right hand is seeking to calm the storm that the left hand is whipping up. And there are two moments where the right hand, in desperation or in a moment of inspiration, finds a melody in the midst of the storm that completely eases the left hand. So the left hand has been ranting and raving, and then out of seemingly nowhere, we have this melody. And that comes twice, so just after that, the left hand kicks up another storm, and then the right hand finds that moment of pure bliss again, and the storm is properly eased. The opening music returns, and we think that's the end of the story, but it's in the coda that some of the most extraordinary harmonic sections occur, as he takes us into far-reaching and exploratory keys, and he returns to some of the drama of the middle section. The left hand is enjoying its trills at this point here, and these sound like the rumblings of thunder in the distance. And it's not until the penultimate bar of the whole piece that the left hand breaks from tradition and joins the right hand in arpeggios. And it feels like that is very much symbolic of the fight having been won. The left hand's scalic, trill, rumbling passion has been eased, has been placated. Yes. I just wanted to turn your attention to one more thing before we start, and that's the magic that happens in the first two bars of this piece. I don't know if he knew quite how effective the tool was that he was employing, but I suspect he was very aware of it. And it takes but a few seconds and but one chord change for us to be totally in the palm of his hand. So what he's done there is he switched between two chords that are very, very similar but sound incredibly different. So the first chord was made up of these three notes, and then I just changed one of them by one step, and we're suddenly in the minor. And I think this is so much in keeping with a lot of Schubert's music, this dichotomy between major and minor, but therefore also a lot of the way that he felt about the world. This was a man who was dying. This was a man who was dying before he'd hit his prime anywhere near. And this was a man, therefore, that was constantly weighing up the idea of beauty and tragedy, I guess, of life and death. So every time he felt in love with life and in love with the world and in love with humanity, that only made the bitterness the more intense, the fact that he was not going to be around to enjoy them for very long. But then at the same time, I feel, the knowledge of his impending death made the beautiful moments even more beautiful. And I think it's beautiful the way he sets aside these majors and minors, because it shows how just the same, almost the exact same experience can be coloured in these different ways. Incredible piece. Very much hope you enjoy it. mad to be able to sum up so much with so little music. I mentioned before that this was not the first concert we've been doing since the lockdown started. I felt so I felt as if a part of my body had been removed when suddenly all the concerts were cancelled, and we immediately wanted to start to do some concerts from this music room. And so for a few months we did with very sort of elementary kit. We did weekly concerts on Sundays, managed to raise some money for the NHS, which was lovely. And as lockdown showed no real signs of ending, and as our concerts have no firm date of returning, a couple of weeks ago we thought we'd kick things up a gear and enhance the experience. So we actually had our first concert last Friday, and it's on my mind, having just played Schubert, because I did Schubert's last sonata in the concert, and although one of them lasts 50 minutes and one of them lasts 6 minutes, there's so much in the general emotional landscape that the two pieces have in common. We'll be doing more concerts, and they're broadcast on Facebook and on YouTube. Anyone who'd like to join us in those, you're in the right place. There's some links in the description. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel. That's probably the best thing to do. The concert series is called Cats, Chats and 88 Keys. The quality's slightly better on YouTube, that's why I would advise that, but they're also broadcast on the Cats, Chats and 88 Keys Facebook page, so if you prefer that, please do give that page a like, and we'll see you there very soon. There are often cats, but tonight they've gone walkabout. For now, maybe a bit of Liszt will bring the felines back into the fray. So now we're going to play Liszt's second ballade. This is, I feel like we live in an era of hyperbole, and words get bandied around. But when I tell you this work is epic, I think that is exactly what it is, and nothing less. Nothing more than what it is, sorry. This piece grabbed me as soon as I was introduced to it, too long ago now to want to consider. I've always loved a piece with a story, especially when I was younger and maybe more musically immature. A piece that had a narrative hook that I could get on board with was exactly what I was after. And it was around the time I discovered Mahler symphonies and Shostakovich symphonies, and the epic has also always appealed to me. I'm also a romantic at heart, and this is fundamentally a love story, albeit a kind of Greek tragedy version of a love story. So, I mean, most composers don't really tell you what the piece is about. If you're playing a Beethoven sonata, you've got about as much clue as anyone else, unless it's the Moonlight or the Pastoral. But if it's any of the 25 or so that have no title, you don't really know what was going on in his head. We infer, our training guides us, but it's anyone's guess. And some composers actively resented the idea that an audience would know what was in their heads. Chopin famously, even when writing the ballades, refused to allow people to know what they were ballads of. Not so Liszt. And in this piece, this ballade, he specifically chose a story. It's rather a good story. It's the story of Hero and Leander from Greek mythology. It's an ill-fated love story, I think is the best way to describe it. Hero is a priestess. She has her chastity enforced upon her, therefore, in rather, I think, fairly harsh circumstances, really. She's locked in a tower in the middle of a huge lake, a vast expanse of water about 4 miles across, called the Hellespont, which is quite close to modern-day Turkey. And she's just supposed to sort of fritter away her days there, I suppose. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on which way you look at it, she's already fallen in love with Leander, and they are not to be thwarted by this isolation. Sorry, I just thought of the similarity of the isolation of then and lockdown, but that's very different. Although in lockdown, couples have been separated as well. But he resolves to do something very drastic to overcome this isolation. At night, she will put a light in her window. I'm amazed she was allowed a window in the tower, frankly. I thought that's way too generous. But she would put a light there, and he would swim across the Hellespont, which is no mean feat, spend the night with her, possibly also no mean feat, and then return in the morning with no one any the wiser. So far so good, and then the old crux of the dark and stormy night comes to ruin the party. And so on one such evening, the wind is so strong that her light cannot prevail, and he is then lost and floundering and overtaken by the raging waves. He perishes, and she, witnessing his death, can think of no future for her other than to plunge herself into the same waters so that she may die alongside him. Here the story ends in true Greek tragedy fashion. But here is not where the piece ends, for Liszt was obviously too much of a romantic to allow such a grisly ending to occur. So he then composes this extraordinary final section which depicts the lovers reuniting in paradise. In terms of structure, it very much departs from the traditional elements of sonata form, even ternary form, that composers before Liszt would have been dabbling with. This is, I think, a piece much more in line with the Wagnerian style of composition, i.e. we're mainly dealing in themes, and themes represent characters or represent emotions or represent episodes. And it's the way those themes then come and interact with each other that tell us the story. So, for example, at the beginning, we have what I like to think of as a kind of mood-setting, stark and stormy night music. The left hand is in rumbling chromatics, and the right hand plays a rich, burnished minor theme, quite low down in the piano. For the first minute of music, we don't get above middle C, and so it has this incredibly dark element to it. We can think of that as the waters, if you like. And then that subsides, and we're introduced to this second theme. Now, I don't think you have to be particularly perceptive to identify a whiff of romance in the air. Suddenly the sound is very clear, very pure, very translucent, but the harmonies are very charged, very sensual. There's a lot of chromaticism and exoticism in the harmonies. These two themes are then repeated, but they're repeated, shifted down by half a step. And I like to think of this as the idea that we've immediately departed from the known. So the piece begins in B minor, that's the key of the entire piece as a whole. And then after we hear those first two themes, they get both repeated, but in B flat minor. And so immediately I think we're into an element, a fantastical element, and an element of uncertainty, which is where all the best stories reside. Come on. So after that, I think we get what is Leander's theme, right? Because there's a feeling of, it's quite martial, it's like someone striding out. And then every now and then there's these triplets that I think also make us think of a galloping horse. It's quite noble, it's quite heroic. And you can almost hear the moment when that builds to a climax and he submerges himself in the water. The swirling ripples juxtaposed with his noble, heroic triplet motif. These are the main elements of the work, and it's how they then are developed that gives us the key to the story. Leander undergoes one clear struggle with the elements and survives, and we get placated, beautiful love theme music as his reward. But there's always another night. And when the stormy music returns again, it is more overwhelming, it is more richly written. At the beginning, the chromatic was just in one hand like this. When it comes back, it's in two voices in the same hand. It's this amazing picture painting that Liszt is embarking on, where we can hear and see the roaring wind and the rolling waves with these rushing, sweeping, whooshing chromatics that go up and down. This leads into an almighty climax, and we are, in my opinion, left with in no doubt at all as to when his head disappears beneath the waves, not to return again. This leads to a kind of slightly disconnected, lost repeat of the love theme. It's not bathed in as much beautiful chromaticism anymore, and it doesn't feel right. It also keeps shifting through keys in a way that suggests aimlessness rather than development. But then, just when we think we're going to fade into nothingness, he turns a harmonic corner and delivers us to B major. So this is the major version of B minor, which we started the piece in. And if you remember the opening theme, the water theme, the nature theme, the storm theme, this is unbelievably reimagined in the major as a sign of the reunion of the two lovers. And I don't mean a real reunion, I mean a metaphysical reunion, their souls reunited in paradise. This leads to an epically wonderful climax, and it really feels in the climax as if they are delighting at their victory over fate, because that theme becomes huge and is repeated here. And while it's being repeated, it's accompanied by rolling ripples in the bass that makes us remember the storm from earlier. But now there's only triumph in the air. Liszt composed 3 endings to this piece. The first 2 endings took this grand narrative of heroism and triumph and pushed it right through to the final few notes. His third ending decided to do something a little bit more nuanced and a bit more sophisticated. And at the peak of the joy, he suddenly reintroduces the love theme. And this gradually allows the euphoria to dissipate, and the piece settles in a very hushed, a surprisingly hushed way, but a way that is full of peace and relaxation. This is a piece that I've been in love with as long as I can remember. It's always the piece I play to people who want to see what the piano can do, want to see what classical music's all about, and it's an absolute delight to share it with you all now. feline angel is singing to us from the corner. I don't know if you picked up his incredible attempt to crowbar in on the lovers' reunion there at the end. That's Tinto, by the way, our dark destroyer. Well, that's that. What a piece. I hope you had as much fun as I did playing that. It's a bit of a banger. I believe there's a little Q&A post-concert chat vibe going on now. I think something on Zoom. I have the details. So I'm sure Amanda's across that. So it just remains for me to say thank you very much for watching. Thank you for supporting Clapham Chamber concerts. And we very much hope that there'll be concerts back in lovely St Paul's Church before too very long. If you would like to see more online concerts, you have the links to my page under this video, and I wish you a very good weekend. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.